I've always seen the family estate as more than just a house. It's the heart of everything my father built with his own hands, a place that felt like a living memory of his strength and fairness. When I walk through those halls, I swear I can still hear his laughter, the warmth of his voice making the old wooden floors feel alive. My father had this way of making everyone feel welcome, and he never let me or my sister Vanessa forget that we both belonged there. Sure, Vanessa and I have had our share of fights over the years. Who doesn't? But deep down, I believed my father's fairness would keep us close. That's why I was sure the inheritance would be divided the way he always said, equally, with love. But lately, Vanessa's calm and smug demeanor has been gnawing at me, stirring up questions I can't ignore. It's in those quiet moments, when the house is still and all I can hear is the distant tick of the grandfather clock, that my doubts start to take root. I've caught Vanessa humming to herself, her eyes too bright, like she's savoring a secret only she's allowed to know. I watch her and feel this uneasy mix of nostalgia and suspicion, remembering the days we were just two little girls playing hide and seek, but also the way she always knew how to bend the rules to her favor. This house is filled with those memories, the crackle of the fireplace in winter, the portraits of our ancestors watching over us, the sweet scent of lavender that still lingers in the air. It's all supposed to be a testament to our family's love and trust, but now that trust feels so fragile in my hands, still, I'm trying to hold on to hope. I spend hours in my father's library, my fingertips tracing the spines of the books he cherished, whispering promises that I'll protect what he wanted, that I'll make sure his legacy isn't overshadowed by Vanessa's smirks. He always told me that both of us deserved the same piece of the family's future. That belief is all I have right now, even as Vanessa's casual indifference makes me wonder if I'm just being naive. I want so badly to believe in my father's promise and to trust my sister, but there's a flicker of doubt in my gut that I can't ignore. I find myself drifting into memories of my father, memories that feel almost too tender to touch. He was a man of principle, always making sure Vanessa and I knew how important fairness was in everything we did. Even when we argued as kids, he'd sit us down and make us talk it out, reminding us that family was supposed to be about love, not competition. I remember the way he'd ruffle my hair and say, "You two are my pride and joy. Always remember that." Those words echo in my mind like a comforting melody, a promise that should have been unbreakable. But Vanessa's distant smiles and her calm, collected tone, they're shattering that promise one crack at a time. When I try to talk to her about the inheritance, she just brushes me off like I'm being dramatic, like I'm imagining things that don't exist. She leans back in her chair with that serene expression, as if she already knows how this story ends, and I'm just too blind to see it. It's infuriating and terrifying, because what if she does know something I don't? What if there's a reason she's so calm? The more I try to trust her, the more I feel like I'm standing on a thin sheet of ice, ready to break at the slightest pressure. My gut tells me there's more going on beneath her poised exterior, something she's not willing to share with me. Still, I keep telling myself that she's my sister, that we shared the same childhood and the same father. I think about the nights we'd stay up late, whispering secrets and dreaming about the future, how we promised to look out for each other no matter what. Those memories used to feel like a warm blanket, something I could wrap around myself when the world felt too cold. But now, every time I look into Vanessa's eyes, all I see is a wall I can't climb. I'm not ready to let go of our bond, but I can't ignore this feeling that something precious is slipping through my fingers. I'm trying to keep the faith that this is just a misunderstanding, that Vanessa will eventually open up to me and will laugh about how I overthought it all. But every day, that hope feels a little harder to reach. It's like I'm standing in the shadows of my father's old workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and the echoes of his hammer. But the warmth is gone, replaced by this creeping chill of uncertainty. I find myself gripping the edges of his workbench, as if holding on to something solid will keep me from drowning in doubt. My father always said that family was about trust, but right now, that trust feels as fragile as the thin glass of his old whiskey tumbler. Even so, I'm not ready to give up. I keep replaying his stories about how he built this estate from the ground up, every brick and beam a testament to his devotion. He believed in fairness so deeply that he made it the cornerstone of our lives. That belief is what's keeping me going, even when Vanessa's cryptic smiles make my stomach twist. I want to believe that she still shares that same sense of duty, that she'd never betray the promise we made to our father. But the way she keeps brushing off my questions, it's like she's rewriting our family's story, and I'm just watching it happen in real time. As I stand there, lost in the weight of the past and the questions of the present, I realize I can't keep ignoring the unease bubbling beneath the surface. Vanessa might be family, but I know my father's voice in my head is urging me not to be blind. If there's something she's hiding, something that could tarnish the legacy he worked so hard to preserve, I owe it to him to find the truth. My heart is torn between the love I still feel for my sister and the fierce need to honor my father's memory. And in that moment, I know I can't just let this go. I didn't expect to find anything that morning. I just wanted to gather a few of my father's belongings, something to keep close and remind me of him. His study always felt like a sanctuary, with the smell of leather-bound books and the soft creak of the old chair he loved. I thought I'd find comfort there, maybe even hear his voice in my mind, guiding me through the grief. But as I sifted through the papers stacked on his mahogany desk, my fingers brushed against a thick envelope. My breath caught in my throat when I saw what was inside, a copy of his will, the one we were supposed to hear in a few days. I pulled it out with trembling hands, expecting to see the same careful script I'd seen 100 times in letters he'd written to me. But the signature at the bottom of the page didn't match. It was messy, rushed, like a poor imitation of his steady penmanship. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint, the room tilting around me as I stared at the forged name. A cold, clammy dread settled over my skin, every instinct in me screaming that this wasn't just a mistake. I forced myself to sit down, my legs shaking, and began pulling out other documents, letters, anything with his signature to compare. The more I compared, the clearer it became. This was no accident. My father's elegant script was as familiar to me as my own, and this was nothing like it. The truth slammed into me with a force I wasn't ready for. Vanessa had forged his signature, rewriting his final wishes as if she alone deserved everything. My mind raced, 1,000 questions spiraling in every direction. How long had she been planning this? How could she betray everything he stood for, and everything we promised each other? My hands trembled, the pages slipping through my fingers like water. I knew I couldn't stay silent, not when the truth was burning a hole in my heart. I remember how I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that forged signature like a stone in my chest. My mind kept replaying the way Vanessa had been acting so smug and calm lately. Now I understood why. She'd been lying to my face, playing the part of the loving sister while stealing everything our father had worked for. My heart ached with betrayal, but more than that, I felt this blazing need for answers. I couldn't let this stand, couldn't let her rewrite the story of our family with a few strokes of a pen. I confronted her later that afternoon, the paper still clutched in my hand like a weapon. Vanessa looked at me with those cold, detached eyes, like she was already bored with my questions. When I demanded an explanation, she didn't even flinch. She just shrugged, like forging our father's will was no big deal. "I always knew how to handle the family's money better than you," she said, her voice dripping with a cold arrogance that made my blood boil. In that moment, I saw the truth of who she really was, and it cut deeper than any lie she could have told me. Standing there, staring at my sister, I felt something inside me shift. The betrayal was raw and brutal, but it also lit a fire in my heart. I realized I couldn't just accept her words, couldn't let her rewrite our family's legacy for her own selfish gain. My father's voice echoed in my head, telling me to fight for what was right, to stand up for the truth even if it cost me everything. Vanessa might have thought she'd won, but I was done letting her play me for a fool. I was ready to prove that his wishes still mattered, no matter how far she'd go to bury them. I walked away from that confrontation, feeling like the walls of the house were closing in around me. The family estate, once a place of warmth and safety, felt like a stage for a cruel betrayal I never saw coming. Every room held echoes of my father's laughter, but now they were drowned out by Vanessa's cold confession. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with memories of our childhood. The bedtime stories he used to tell us, the way he'd make us promise to always take care of each other. I kept hearing those promises in my head, but they sounded so hollow now. In the quiet of my father's study, I realized this was bigger than just me and Vanessa. This was about honoring the man who'd given us everything, about making sure his legacy wasn't tainted by greed. I couldn't let Vanessa's lies stand unchallenged, not when I could still feel the weight of his hand on my shoulder, the warmth of his belief in me. My father always said that the truth had a way of shining through, no matter how hard people tried to hide it. In that moment, I knew I had to be the one to bring that truth into the light. As I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, I felt a quiet resolve settle over me. I didn't know exactly how I would prove what Vanessa had done, but I knew I wouldn't stop until I did. My father deserved better than a lie written in his name. My family's legacy deserved better, and I wasn't going to let Vanessa's betrayal define who we were, or who I was going to be. Even if it meant fighting alone, I was ready to stand up for what was right. Because in my heart, I knew the story wasn't over yet. The next few days felt like a blur, but I refused to let that stop me. I reached out to a lawyer, someone who knew how to navigate these tangled webs of inheritance and deceit. Every step felt like I was peeling back layers of my father's past, and each piece of evidence I found made the betrayal even more real. Vanessa tried to intimidate me, calling me weak, saying I was tearing the family apart by questioning her. But I knew deep down that I wasn't the one destroying the family. She was. I had to remind myself of that every time her cold, dismissive voice tried to shake my resolve. The lawyer helped me start the process of gathering evidence, sifting through old files and documents with a meticulous patience I didn't think I had in me. I spent hours in that dusty library, comparing signatures and hunting down old family friends who might remember my father's wishes. It was exhausting work, physically and emotionally. Some nights I'd collapse into bed, my eyes burning from the strain of staring at legal forms and faded letters. But every time I felt doubt creeping in, I'd close my eyes and hear my father's voice. "Don't give up, Diana. The truth matters more than comfort." And so, I kept going. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to let all the frustration and heartbreak out into the silence of the night. But I'd stand by the window instead, looking out over the estate my father built with his own hands, and I'd remember what this fight was really about. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about making sure my father's memory wasn't tarnished by Vanessa's lies. I knew there would be more sleepless nights ahead, more hurdles and heartaches to come. But I also knew I couldn't stop now, because in my heart, I could feel him standing beside me, reminding me why I had to see this through. Every piece of evidence felt like a small victory. A signature here, a letter there, each one a thread that would eventually weave together the truth. My lawyer encouraged me to be patient, to trust the process even when it felt like it was moving at a snail's pace. I remember how he'd look me in the eye and say, "Diana, this isn't just about a piece of paper. It's about proving who your father really was." Those words stuck with me like an anchor, keeping me steady even when Vanessa's taunts tried to pull me under. She called me ungrateful, said I was disrespecting his memory. But I knew that fighting for the truth was the greatest respect I could show. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between meetings and phone calls, I'd think about the weight of what I was doing. I'd remember my father's rough hands, the way he'd fix a broken hinge or mend a torn fence without a second thought. He taught me that real strength wasn't in brute force but in the determination to keep going, even when the odds felt impossible. I tried to channel that strength every day, even when my own doubts threatened to crack me open. There were days I'd find myself staring out at the garden he loved, breathing in the scent of fresh earth and wildflowers, and I'd let that memory steady me. The case finally made it to court, and I'll never forget the feeling of standing there with the weight of my father's memory in my heart. I brought everything I had: handwriting samples, letters, testimonies from people who knew him, and even an expert to confirm the forgery. I could feel Vanessa's cold stare on me, but I refused to flinch. This was my chance to set things right, to honor the man who raised me and the values he stood for. I took a deep breath, held my head high, and told myself, this isn't just about inheritance. It's about family, and it's about truth. The courtroom felt like another world, cold, sterile, and so far from the warmth of my father's home. I watched as the evidence was laid out piece by piece, each document and testimony painting a picture of betrayal and greed. Vanessa sat there, stone-faced, her eyes flicking up to meet mine only once or twice. But I didn't need her to speak. Her silence spoke volumes. I could see the cracks in her composure, the way her jaw tightened when the lawyer read out my father's real signature. In that sterile courtroom, it felt like my father's voice was finally breaking through the lies. Even as the days dragged on and the weight of the trial pressed down on me, I never lost sight of why I was there. It wasn't about punishing Vanessa. It was about protecting the truth and everything my father had worked so hard to build. I felt his presence with me every time I spoke, like he was standing right beside me, reminding me to be brave. There were moments when I thought I might break, when the grief and exhaustion felt too heavy to carry. But then I'd look at the faces of the people who believed in me, my lawyer, old family friends, and I'd remember that I wasn't alone in this fight. As the trial neared its end, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief because I knew the truth was finally coming to light, but sadness because I knew that no matter the outcome, nothing would ever be the same between me and Vanessa. There was no going back to the way things used to be, no fixing the rift her betrayal had carved between us. But as I sat there waiting for the verdict, I realized that maybe that was okay, because this was never really about the past. It was about finding the strength to face the future, no matter how uncertain it might be. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, it felt like the air in the courtroom shifted. I sat there with my heart pounding in my chest, my hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench so tightly that my knuckles ached. The words seemed to echo through the room. Vanessa's forgery was exposed, and the inheritance would be returned to its rightful place. I felt a surge of relief wash over me, a fierce, trembling relief that left me blinking back tears I didn't even realize I was holding in. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my father's memory, for the promise he made that fairness and love should always be at the heart of our family. Vanessa didn't look at me as the judge spoke, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the courtroom walls. I could see the flush of shame creeping up her neck, the tension in her shoulders that told me she knew the game was over. Part of me wanted to reach out to her, to find some shred of the sister I'd grown up with, but another part of me knew that trust had already been shattered beyond repair. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was the end of something I thought was unbreakable. And as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't turn away from that truth. Afterwards, I stepped out of the courtroom into the pale afternoon sunlight, feeling like I was seeing the world for the first time in months. My father's estate, the gardens, the laughter of the children in the distance, it all felt brighter, more real somehow. But beneath that brightness was a sadness I couldn't quite shake. Because even though Vanessa's lies had been exposed, the price we'd paid for the truth was steep. And in that moment, standing there on the courthouse steps, I realized that winning didn't mean I'd gotten back what I lost. It just meant I could finally start to heal. In the days that followed, the story of Vanessa's betrayal spread like wildfire through the small town. Family, friends, and neighbors would stop me on the street, their eyes filled with sympathy and curiosity. Some offered words of comfort, while others looked at me with that hesitant mix of pity and relief, as if they didn't know how to bridge the gap between us. I tried to be gracious, to accept their kindness without letting it overwhelm me. But inside, there was a quiet ache that no one's words could really touch. The ache of knowing that my own sister had seen me as an obstacle instead of family. I spent a lot of time alone in those first few days, wandering the halls of the family estate and letting the memories wash over me. I'd find myself in the garden, running my fingers over the rough bark of the old oak tree my father planted when I was born. It was a reminder of where we came from, the roots that went deeper than any lie Vanessa had told. I think I needed that time to breathe, to feel the weight of everything that had happened, and to let the sadness settle. Because even though the court had ruled in my favor, the pain of losing my sister's trust felt like a scar that would never quite fade. Vanessa and I didn't speak after the trial. She packed her things and left the estate without a word, leaving behind only silence and a few echoes of laughter from our childhood. I wish I could say I felt relief when she left, but the truth is, it felt like the final chapter of a story I'd never wanted to write. I knew that no matter what happened next, things would never be the same between us. And yet, even as I felt the finality of it all settling in, I also felt something else. A quiet, steady determination to carry on. Because my father's legacy wasn't just about what he left behind, it was about what I chose to build with it. In the stillness that followed Vanessa's departure, I found myself turning inward, seeking answers in the quiet spaces of my heart. There were moments when I missed her, not the woman she'd become, but the sister I used to know, the one who used to braid my hair and hold my hand when we crossed the street. But I also knew that some betrayals cut so deep they can never be fully healed. And as much as I wanted to cling to the past, I couldn't ignore the truth that had been laid bare in that courtroom. My father's legacy demanded more than nostalgia. It demanded that I live with integrity and honor the family he built. I spent hours in my father's study, the scent of old paper and cedar filling the air as I sorted through his belongings. Each letter, each worn photograph was a reminder of the man who taught me to stand my ground, to never let fear decide my fate. I thought about the choices he made, the values he held close, and I knew that he would have been proud of me for standing up to Vanessa's lies. Even if it broke my heart, even if it meant closing the door on the sister I once adored, I knew that I had done the right thing. And in that knowledge, I felt a quiet kind of peace. As I looked out the window one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that this wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. The estate stood around me, solid and enduring, and I felt a flicker of hope in my chest. There was still work to be done, still dreams to be fulfilled. My father had given me the tools to build a future that was honest and kind, and I wasn't about to let that go to waste. I took a deep breath, letting the evening air fill my lungs, and I promised myself that I would carry his legacy forward with grace. Because even though Vanessa's betrayal had changed everything, it hadn't changed who I was, or who I was determined to become. In the months that followed, I threw myself into caring for the family estate. It became my refuge, a place where I could feel close to my father again. I spent long hours in the garden he loved, pruning the rose bushes and planting new seedlings, feeling the dirt under my nails like a quiet reminder that life always finds a way to bloom again. The air was filled with the gentle hum of bees and the soft rustle of leaves, and in those peaceful moments, I felt my father's presence more strongly than ever. It was as if each new blossom was his way of telling me that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The house itself became a canvas for my healing. I dusted off old family portraits and carefully restored them, finding comfort in the faces of ancestors who'd come before us. I moved through the rooms with a quiet purpose, each brushstroke and polished surface a small act of love, not just for my father, but for myself. I wanted every corner of that house to feel alive, to honor the legacy he left behind. Some days it felt like I was learning how to breathe again, one small act of restoration at a time. As I worked, I found solace in the simple routines that had once been just background noise. I'd make myself a cup of tea in the early morning light, the steam rising in gentle swirls as I stood at the kitchen window. I'd listen to the birds singing in the orchard and let their music fill the empty spaces inside me. Even though Vanessa was gone and some wounds would never truly heal, I felt a new sense of belonging in those quiet, ordinary moments. And with each passing day, I felt a little more like myself, a little more like the daughter my father had always believed in. I found unexpected strength in the connections I began to rebuild. Family friends who had stood by me during the trial became a source of comfort, their kindness weaving new threads of hope into my days. They'd stop by for a cup of coffee or lend a hand in the garden, sharing stories of my father and reminding me that I wasn't alone in this. It felt like I was piecing together a quilt of memories, each conversation and shared laugh adding another patch of warmth and belonging. The pain of Vanessa's betrayal was still there, but it didn't feel so sharp when I was surrounded by people who believed in me. As the seasons changed, so did the estate. The garden flourished under my care, and I took pride in every new bloom, every carefully tended row of vegetables. It was more than just gardening. It was a way to carry forward my father's love for this place, to keep it alive in every leaf and petal. In those early mornings, with the sun casting long shadows over the land, I felt a quiet sense of purpose I hadn't known in years. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else anymore. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself, one rooted in honesty and care. There were moments when the past would still sneak up on me, a song on the radio, the scent of my father's cologne lingering in an old jacket, and I'd feel that old ache in my chest. But I'd close my eyes, take a deep breath, and remind myself of the promise I'd made, to honor my father's legacy not with bitterness, but with grace. Because even though Vanessa's absence left a hollow space in my heart, it also left room for me to grow. And in that quiet emptiness, I discovered a new kind of strength, one that didn't need anyone's permission to shine. On warm evenings, I'd find myself standing at the edge of the property, where the fields rolled out like a golden sea under the setting sun. I'd close my eyes and let the breeze wash over me, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the fight, the quiet triumph that followed. There was a kind of peace in those moments, a sense that I'd finally come through the storm and found something steady to hold on to. My father's voice still echoed in my mind, not as a demand, but as a gentle reassurance. "You've done enough, Diana. You're exactly where you're meant to be." I knew that Vanessa would probably never come back, and maybe that was for the best. Some wounds heal with time, but others are meant to be left behind. What mattered most was that I'd found a way to stand tall again, to let the truth of who I was guide me forward. In the soft hush of dusk, I felt closer to my father than ever, as if he was right there beside me, his hand on my shoulder, reminding me that the best parts of him lived on in me. And I realized that his legacy wasn't just the estate or the inheritance. It was the strength he'd taught me to carry, even when the world felt heavy. As I stood there, the last light of day painting the fields in gold and amber, I felt a quiet kind of joy, the kind that comes not from having everything, but from knowing you've honored what truly matters. I took a deep breath and whispered a thank you to the wind, to the earth, to my father's memory. Because in the end, I knew that I'd done more than just protect the family estate. I'd reclaimed my own story, woven it with truth and care, and let it take root in a future that was finally, truly mine.